Finn the Human. Finn and Jake follow the Lich into the portal where he enters the Time Room. They follow him only to find it empty save for Prismo, who says he just granted the Lich a wish to exterminate all life. But Finn and Jake get a wish of their own, and hoping to prevent the Lich from undoing their wish to undo his wish, they wish that the Lich never existed. Farmworld Finn is asked by his mother to sell the family mule in town to raise the money they need to pay off the Destiny Gang. While tracking down the mule, Finn comes across a hole with a frozen missile on top of a skeleton. An old woman explains that the skeleton belonged to Simon Petrikov, who used the Crown's ice magic to stop the destruction of the world and the rise of a fabled terror known as the Lich. Finn ignores her warnings and takes the crown to Junktown to sell, and the old woman, revealed to be Marceline, is told by the skeleton to get the crown back. Finn arrives at the market where the Destiny Gang steals both the crown and the mule before retreating to their palace. After fighting one of the goons and encouraging the others to fight with him, Finn receives a bladed arm from Choose Bruce and rushes the palace himself, only for the leader, Big Destiny, to give him the crown back, pointing to the Junktown, which is now on fire, and saying they're coming for his house next. Finn rescues Marceline and rushes back to his home, where he sees his family burning. Remembering what Marceline said about the crown's magical powers, he puts it on his head. Jake the Dog. With his newly granted ice powers, Finn is able to save his family, though the crown starts telling him to freeze everything, and his magic ends up detonating the bomb. He sends his family away before rescuing the Destiny Gang to serve as his minions, though they flee from him as well. Finn sees Jake inside of a pit of goo, where the bones of Marceline tell him all for using the crown's power. Jake begins to go rabid, biting at Finn's arm before shifting into the Lich as Finn blasts him with ice and the feed gets cut. Jake has been hanging out with Prismo and the Cosmic Owl, eating sandwiches with pickles and freestyling in the hot tub as Jake ignores most of the events on screen. But when the Cosmic Owl unmutes a scene of Farmworld Finn mourning Jake's death, he begins to wonder what he needs to do to prevent that from happening. Prismo warns him that every wish he grants comes with a downside and that he ought to consider his wish very carefully, eventually going as far as to tell Jake exactly what to ask for, that the Lich's wish was for Finn and Jake to return home. They return to the Candy Kingdom just after the Lich vanished, where Jake is excited as each of the jewels returns home, the only thing left of their journey being a jar of Prismo's pickles and a note. In an alternate universe where the Lich never existed, there has to have been a reason for him to exist in the first place that was simply stopped. Here, it's revealed that the inciting incident to create the branch of the universe Finn and Jake live in was Simon Petrikov sacrificing himself to avoid disaster, meaning that Marceline never grew up alongside him, and he never became the Ice King, and that Finn and Jake never became the sort of heroes to stand up to guys like the Destiny Gang. But it doesn't mean that the world is devoid of villains, as there will always be someone out there to pick on those who can't defend themselves. While the Lich may have never existed, there are still folks out there with his same dedication to wanton destruction. But wherever there are villains, there are bound to be heroes too, if only because there are villains in the first place. Farm Finn and Regular Dog are living a humble life, their reaction to seeing their father get bullied for money to figure out a way to raise that money, while the Finn of Ooh we recognize would have fought them regardless of if it was a good idea. It's not until arriving at Junktown and having these goods stolen from him that Finn starts to fight back. It's because that became the path of least resistance. Before, the easiest way to live life was for Finn to keep to himself, drawing no extra attention and doing what he can to satiate the greed of those around him. But when that becomes impossible to do, he just fights. The peaceful solution was the best solution until it wasn't, and then the violent solution became the only solution, so it was inevitable. So all of this implies that the Finn and Jake that we know are adventurers not because adventuring is all they know, but because adventuring is all they can know. The first part of this three-parter was the culmination of Finn meeting his hero Billy and trying to be as much like him as possible. The story then ends with a tale of what would happen without a Billy for Finn to look up to. No Lich means no one to slay the Lich, which means no heroes to aspire to. No heroes to aspire to means Finn and Jake live normal lives with parents who are still around. But no heroes means villains, and villains mean heroes. And the entire cycle of good guys and bad guys with capital letters and everything resets as though the two groups were predator and prey in the wild, whose populations wavered, but eventually reach equilibrium. This then implies an aspect of nominative determinism, which is a fancy way of saying that things are not only named after what they are, but tend to become what they're named after. The Candy Kingdom is full of candy people who are sweet because that's all they can know. Lumpy Space Princess is lumpy because the space around her is lumpy, even though that space is named after her. And Finn and Jake are heroes because they call themselves heroes. Other people call them heroes, and to a certain extent, they act like heroes too. Five more short Graybles. Cuber hosts 5 more short Graybles like the episode title, once again asking viewers to guess the theme between them. First is Finn and Jake reading a fairy tale about little Jack Horner sticking his thumb into a pie and saying, "Oh, what a good boy am I." They decide to recreate this tale by sticking their thumbs into as many things as possible, starting with the plum and moving on to more and more absurd objects. Next is Marceline seeking out Wizard Bill's guitar shop to play the most savory licks imaginable. She finds the rock giant and asks him for directions, but because his extended pointer finger is so long, she simply hitches a ride on his hand and asks him to point out the way again, before arriving for a bass solo. While strolling the Candy Kingdom, Tree Trunks sees a giant who beckons to her before making a rude hand gesture. She tries reporting this to the Banana Guard, but they take too long to do the paperwork. So she takes justice into her own hands, recruiting some vigilantes, before returning to the scene of the crime where she sees it was merely a statue with a raised fist, with Shelby reading in the middle. Ice King announces that he's going to have a new woman around the house, and then lifts his robe to show that he has drawn a lady's face on his foot. He proposes, his foot says yes, and the penguins drink his tears of joy as he takes a set of rings and places one on his toe and another on his ring finger. Ice King then sits on his porch, watching Finn and Jake put their thumbs into stuff before noticing the lady's face he drew on his other foot. Finally, BMO is teaching their reflection football on how to behave in high society by holding out one's pinky finger while drinking a cup of bitter tea. But football keeps messing this up, and the duo pours more and more tea onto their circuitry before Finn and Jake come home to put their thumbs into something good, the buttons on a controller. Cuber finally reveals that the theme for all 5 Graybles was the 5 senses. Finn and Jake had a sweet plum, Marceline's guitar was savory, Tree Trunk saw a sour expression, Ice King cried salty tears, and BMO drank bitter tea. He also says that the theme had nothing to do with the 5 fingers because no one's had 5 fingers on their hand in centuries. Up a tree. Finn and Jake are having a picnic with Lady when they find a throwing and catching disc, as Finn prepares to make the perfect throw. But his perfect throw arcs the disc on top of a big tree. Finn rejects Jake's assistance as he wants to get the disc himself, though a porcupine offers to assist him by boosting Finn up with his spikes. This only hurts Finn's butt, but is able to use the quills left behind to begin the climb upward. A squirrel then offers to assist him by giving Finn an apple that will replenish his energy, and although Finn rejects this at first, the squirrel forces it into his mouth. It turns out to be a cursed apple that shrinks Finn, but he continues to climb anyway. He sees the squirrel from before tying a kite, and also overhears the rest of the tree's animals plotting to sabotage Finn's climb up, saying anything in the tree is part of the tree. Finn is knocked out and arrested, but the squirrel is guarding him while lamenting that he can't fly like he wants to. Finn offers to break out with him, and they grab the throwing and catching disc before running onto a long branch. He tosses the disc, but it flies away, so he jumps onto the flying squirrel's back, and they fly to freedom. Except the flying squirrel is just a regular squirrel, and they begin to plummet, until the disc returns having been the perfect throw, allowing the duo to soar through the sky. A solo adventure that Finn insists on doing without the help of Jake, where almost every complication along the way is caused by someone else trying to help him anyway. He rejects the porcupine suggestion to use cartoon physics to boost him up to the top of the tree, but still uses 2 quills to climb up, despite that being equally unrealistic. He rejects an offer to eat an apple to replenish his energy, only to have it replenished when he grows tiny anyway. It wasn't that he didn't want the boost, he just didn't want other people to offer it to him. These feelings are almost vindicated near the middle of the episode when it's revealed everyone in the tree was actually part of a big conspiracy to prevent him from taking something that belonged to the tree, But it's then given a logical conclusion with Finn not accepting someone else's help, but offering to help another person to escape as well. Although, that's probably reading too far into it. This episode was more than likely meant to be a what if the cute forest creatures were actually dangerous, sort of bait and switch, to better fit in with the rest of Adventure Time's general vibe. All the Little People. Finn and Jake are sitting on a cliff discussing relationship advice when Magic Man appears from a hole in the ground, placing a bag in Finn's pants while whispering he isn't coming back. Finn discovers that this tiny bag is full of miniature versions of him and his friends, and a few C-listers, and he dumps them out on the table to start playing with them. This play mostly consists of pushing two random people together and watching what happens, usually resulting in weird couplings like Jake jamming with Ice King or Turtle Princess spanking Zergiok. Jake's weirded out by this and leaves to spend some time with Lady Rainicorn, leaving Finn behind to read books by J.T. Dogzone while playing pretend with All the Little People, where he tries hooking up Princess Bubblegum and Flame Princess with himself, only for them to fight. When Jake returns, he sees that the tree fort is a mess and all the little people have had their lives ruined by Finn's intervention. Jake suggests shaking the little people so he can speak to them on their wavelength as they can't perceive him otherwise, and Finn is able to appear as a face in the clouds to his little self. He apologizes for causing everything, saying he's not coming back, then moving on to the other little people before throwing a dance party where all is forgiven. Jake's assertion at the beginning of the episode about not playing in people's love lives due to how unconventional love can be holds true for his character through the end of the episode, but Finn still attempts to test this assertion by playing Glob with all the tiny people he found. Finn pushes some people together based on what he believes ought to happen, and pushes others apart because to him, they don't belong together. His belief in these people not being good partners comes from a biased point of view due to what he knows about them in his universe, whereas the little people seem to be blank slates who keep a few traits of their origins without any of the emotional baggage that comes from knowing one another beforehand. The real Ice King and the real Jake don't get along because they fought so many times before, but in the Little People verse, they're just fellow musicians playing songs together for the first time. What Finn spends this episode doing is akin to shipping, a hobby that fans of some works obsess over to the same extent as our protagonist. And in shipping, the pairings that occur make about as much sense as some of the relationships in Finn's Little People playset. Ice King and BMO? Why not? Finn and Lady? Sure. It's when the real-world equivalent of Jake sees what Finn has been up to that he starts to chide Finn for forcing random relationships just to see what will happen, with no regard for the long-term effects. The way to fix it is not so much for Finn to apologize and tell everyone these flings were meaningless because he forced them, but because he made a huge dance party at the end, not really caring about whether things make sense and just letting stuff happen, rather than forcing something nonsensical for no reason. Jake the Dad. Finn and BMO come over to see Jake's newborn children, though when Jake sees how rough Uncle Finn is playing with the kids, he asks them to leave so he can focus on taking care of them. He follows the advice of a series of hollow messages from his mother on things like how to make breakfast and how to perform CPR if the kids stop moving. He tries reading a book about a baby-eating fox to the kids, but when the hollow message says the subject matter's too dark, he throws it out the window, where it's discovered by Mr. Fox and the others. These foxes decide to take the book's advice as they head out to find some babies to eat, around the time where Jake is taking the kids out for fresh air. But as Jake is exhausted from having stayed up all night protecting the kids, he's too tired to realize they've gotten loose and are having fun in the forest. Jake scoops them up and takes them home, only to fall asleep just outside his house. And then the foxes come, dragging Jake back to the forest as they think he might be a baby. Lady lets the kids go save him, which they do by transforming and fighting off all the foxes while calling the hollow messages stupid. This causes Jake to remember that he thought the same thing about these messages when he was a kid, and Jake resolves to let the children learn their own lessons. In the end, he returns to the tree fort with Finn as rainicorns grow up fast, and because that's where all his stuff was. Jake wants to be a good father to his children, so he decides to raise his kids by using the example that his mother set for him. After all, his mother raised him, so he knows that she must be competent at being a mom. His mistake, though, is that he was trying so hard to emulate the type of mother that his mother was trying to be, instead of the mother she really was. Margaret was trying to be a good mom according to what her instructional hollow messages said, but the fond childhood memories Jake had were about all the times where she ignored the messages to do something more instinctive. And sure, the instinctive actions likely put her children in danger, but a life free of danger and risk is a life free of lessons to learn. It's nearly impossible to drill a lesson into a person's mind without any sort of real-world experience, and no child will get real-world experience if their parents are going out of their way to prevent that from happening. A lot of parents wind up hurting their kids in this way, but as we see from Jake, this isn't something that makes one a bad parent. It's perfectly natural to want to protect your family from harm, and doing so is not a bad thing. In fact, it's actually a difficult position for parents to accept that their kids ought to make mistakes when your job is to protect them from that. Parenting is less about teaching lessons and more about teaching your kids to teach themselves, so they only need to mess up once to learn from the mistake, instead of having you fix all of their problems and learning nothing. There's a reason Jake goes back to the tree fort at the end of the episode, and it isn't just because the show wants to maintain the status quo. Davey. After slaying a dragon and freeing all of the candy people inside its stomach, Finn is swarmed by a mob of candy people who all want to have dinner with him and hang out and stuff. Finn flees the scene to stay inside, where a game of cops and robbers with BMO gives Finn the idea to shave his head and put on a fake mustache while telling everyone his name is Davey. This disguise works, and Finn begins walking around the Candy Kingdom unbothered, doing normal things and working normal jobs, eventually building a normal house next to the tree fort. Realizing that Finn is taking the Davey thing too far, Jake takes BMO's robber disguise and pretends to rob Davey and his new friend, though Davey simply calls the banana guards over and Jake is arrested. This causes Davey to grow concerned about his new name and identity, so Finn dons the Davey disguise one last time. He sneaks into the Candy Kingdom prisons to find Jake, smuggling him out with some swept keys and placing his mustache on a horse to lure the banana guard away while hiding Jake in his pocket. Sometimes you just want to get away from it all, but sometimes it all is you, and it's hard to get away from yourself. So Finn adopts an alter ego who's nothing like Finn, and Davey takes over to do the opposite of what Finn used to do. Not only the things Finn disliked doing before, but fully committing to the bit as he begins to find enjoyment in the little things, normally forbidden to him because of his status. Finn becomes an NPC, and he's practically invisible as a result. Once he's socially invisible, he starts to become invisible in other ways, neglecting the random quests and adventures he used to go on for more common-sense solutions to his problem, like just calling the police when there's a threat instead of taking it on himself. This is why Jake struggles to free his friend from his new lifestyle. Finn was enjoying having other people take charge of his life for a bit. Let somebody else save the day, and let someone else live in the crazy house, and let somebody else get mobbed by people who want to invite him on even more crazy adventures. But one thing that Davey lacks that Finn gets to do is spend time with his friend. Normal guys like Davey don't have shape-shifting dogs for brothers, so to rescue Jake he has to lose the disguise, but not before using it one last time to prove that the thing he was lacking in the first place is something he couldn't just do anyway. By proving that Davey can still do adventures, Finn is able to know for sure that that wasn't the thing he didn't want in his life, and it really was the fame getting to him, not his brother and not his real identity. Mystery Dungeon. Shelby, Tree Trunks, Lemon Grab, Nectar, and Ice King wake up inside of a dungeon with a riddle telling them to go to the room in its center. The walls begin to close in on them, and they flee to the next room where they can't find an exit door and begin to worry about what they'll do for food. But Tree Trunks makes them a pie that attracts a giant rat who also shows them the way out. The next room has a steamy pool that nullifies Ice King's powers that they can't cross without distracting a sea monster. They use Tree Trunks as bait to pull the monster out of the water before she cuts her way out, and they enter the next room where Lemon Grab's essence subdues the next monster. They finally come across a room with a complex algorithm blocking it when Ice King realizes that he grabbed Nectar instead of BMO for their hacker, revealing that their presence in the dungeon was his doing to access the central room. Nectar throws a pie at the door and shorts it out, and the group is able to access the ancient sleeping magi of life-giving, who can bring things to life. Ice King chooses to throw his Fiona and Cake fanfics inside, only for the magi to bring the book itself to life, where it repeatedly farts in Ice King's face. Everyone leaves through a hole in the ground where Finn and Jake meet with Shelby as they watch Ice King and Nectar role-playing in disgust. Neptr is technically Ice King's son, though in his introductory episode I wrote about the way that one's parentage has more to do with who you take after than any sort of biology. Here, we see that Neptr still craves Ice King's attention, despite not getting it no matter the actions he performs. Ice King chooses Tree Trunks as the party's designated pie maker, despite one member being a pie-making robot. He rewards Tree Trunks and Lemongrabs for catching the sea monster, despite Neptr being the first to help him pull. Neptr's even the one capable of shutting down the final obstacle, despite Ice King assuming he can't, because he thought he had the wrong robot. So Neptr seeks out the approval of a person he cannot get approval from, because he's not looking to approve of anyone at the moment. Ice King's ultimate reward is to bring things to life, though instead of the actual prize of his ideas being given life, it's the book itself. His whole quest resembles that of a TTRPG module, where the DM has designed a dungeon after a specific party composition, or vice versa. This is a callback to Adventure Time's origins, where it took inspiration from friendly campaigns, not only in the aesthetics of its world, but in the personality of the creatures there. The whole thing feels very crafted around being navigable like a video game, and that comes down to problems made to be solved with the tools or characters already available. All your fault. Princess Bubblegum receives a letter from the Earls of Lemongrab regarding the fact that his kingdom has run out of candy to eat. So PB sends Finn and Jake with a bag full of valuable candy seeds so they can regrow more candy to end the famine. The duo walks through the castle, meeting Lemon John, a giant wall, who guides them deeper and deeper past several rooms full of giant organs before they find Lemongrab and Lemongrab inside of a cell. Jake breaks down the door, but the Lemongrabs are terrified because they locked themselves in there to keep the starving people out after they used PB's formula for candy life to turn all of their food sentient. Finn gives the Lemongrabs the seeds, but they immediately use them to make more life. So Finn suggests that they see Princess Bubblegum, and the Lemongrabs agree, only to declare they're going to have Lemon John invade the Candy Kingdom, growing giant and walking the entire castle over. Because Lemon John is too big to fight directly, Finn and Jake go back inside the castle to find his heart, punching it with Jake's fists and causing it to start beating. Now having a working heart, Lemon John feels the moral ambiguity between letting the lemon people starve or eating the candy people, and he solves the conundrum by exploding into lemon drops for all to eat. Princess Bubblegum scrubs the knowledge of the formula for candy life from the Lemongrabs, but doesn't erase their evil nature, as they're just like that. At first, it seems unfair for the Earls of Lemongrab to accuse Finn or Princess Bubblegum of their problem because it was their own ineptitude that caused their famine. But earlier episodes have established that PB views her creations as an extension of herself. To reject Lemongrab entirely is to reject her own methods and mistakes. If she just eliminates people she doesn't like, she's no better than he is. So she sends aid to a kingdom run by screaming despots because they are her screaming despots. To ignore the call for help is to ignore the responsibilities of having made life. But not all of the blame has to be placed on PB or Finn or whoever, as one of the characteristics of really living means some degree of free will. At a certain point, Princess Bubblegum cannot be expected to babysit them all the time. Finn and Jake literally give a beating heart to the earldom itself, which gave it self-awareness to view its actions in the context of the world beyond itself. No more can Lemongrab simply say it's Princess Bubblegum's fault for giving him life, as that's long enough in the past he needs to learn to make his own mistakes. Lemon John understands that the role of a leader is to make the best overall decisions for his people, even if that decision is difficult. So he makes the ultimate sacrifice to end a famine and becomes Lemon Candies, a combination of the roots of the Earl of Lemongrab and his modern incarnation as a sour lemon. Little Dude. Finn and Jake are swimming near the Candy Kingdom when Finn's hat touches a flower belonging to the ancient sleeping magi of life-giving, and it becomes sentient. They return home with their new hat friend, who they name Little Dude, where it begins trying to climb onto BMO's head. That night, the Magi breaks into their house and is captured by Finn and Jake, only for the wizard to warn them that everything he brings to life becomes evil, and that Little Dude is on his way to the Candy Kingdom. Here, the hat climbs onto the head of a random man who gains relative hat strength before terrorizing the kingdom by throwing horses. Finn and Jake ask the Magi to turn it good, but he can't, as his powers only work in evil ways, because he cannot stop thinking about how much he disappointed his father. But when the hat climbs on top of one of the Gumball Guardians, Jake asks the Magi to think about his mom, who was much more understanding, and he's able to cast good magic. The ancient sleeping Magi of life-giving brings a bunch of other things to life, and they all start trying to hug everything, ordered to hug their brother Little Dude into submission. They capture the hat and return their life energy to the Magi, though Finn feels bad about taking his life away and asks for it back, giving Little Dude to his father and then leaving to make a new hat. This episode seems like a jokey follow-up to something like Mystery Dungeon, where the MacGuffin character from that storyline appears again to instigate another plot. But it actually introduces a pretty interesting theory about the magic system in the land of Oo. Specifically, it posits that magic is an inherently neutral force, and that the personality of the caster determines whether the spell has a villainous or heroic effect. ASMLG, thinking about disappointing his father, causes everything he touches to come to life and turn evil, but thinking about the love his mother showed him makes all his magical children obsessed with hugs and loving one another. Expanding this idea and applying it to the other magic users we've seen thus far adds new context to the deeds they perform. Ice King is considered a capital E evil wizard because he thinks evil thoughts, more so than because he does evil things. A good wizard is a person who casts magic while thinking good things, while trying to help people. We've seen before that Finn's actions and deeds in things such as his attempts to save the unambiguously evil Fire King are still considered good actions, not out of some attempt to quantify whether the end result is positive or negative, but because Finn was trying to be good while he did this. Bad Little Boy. Ice King is reading his latest Fiona and Cake fanfic to a few captive princesses who complain about how bad the story is. Marceline appears to free the princesses and criticize Ice King's story, deciding to write her own version of it with more romance. Fiona is eating cream puffs with Prince Gumball when they hear a bump on the roof, discovering Marshall Lee playing his guitar up there. He invites her to a party of lumpy space princes, where he invites her on stage to sing a song about how she's a good girl hanging out with a bad boy. The two play fight a bit before Cake tries to break it up, though Marshall ends up pushing the cat over and Fiona runs over to help her. But Marshall, to prove he's evil, kidnaps Cake and takes her to a graveyard where he raises the dead to fight off Fiona while singing about how evil he is. But in the scuffle, he is stabbed by a spear and falls down, trying to flirt with Fiona on his deathbed before telling her it was just a joke when she reacts poorly. The princesses love Marceline's romance story, but Ice King hates it, kicking them all out before going downstairs to his Fiona and Cake shrine. Thus far, the Fiona and Cake shorts are all fanfiction about the characters of Oo written by the characters of Oo. This means that their self-inserts are just extensions of real perceptions of each other's personalities. An obvious example of this is the Ice King, appearing as himself, who's fawned over by everyone in universe. Obviously, this is not how the actual Ice King is treated, but it's how the Ice King wishes he were treated by everyone else. The same can be said for the characters in Marceline's story. They're an idealized version of the people that she knows. Marshall Lee is what Marceline thinks of herself, though the guy himself is depicted through the lens of the main character Fiona, so it's really how Marceline thinks Finn thinks of her. Marshall Lee is a cool guy who people are attracted to because he is considered a villain. He acts bad, and people love him for that. Though this too has less to do with the appeal of the bad boy attitude, and more to do with Fiona being sick of Prince Gumball, because he's too boring, and his tasks no longer feel like adventures. This creates an awkward narrative where the story is about what Marceline thinks Finn would think about what Marceline thinks about Princess Bubblegum, where her feelings influence his opinions. It's just as self-serving as Ice King's, but then again, almost every story written is semi-biographical, so the only difference is that it's more subtle about it. Vault of Bones. The Flame King appears underneath Jake's tea kettle and starts whispering evil in Flame Princess's ears, which starts to make her think she'll become evil. So Finn offers to take her to a dungeon to help her clear her head. They walk randomly through the woods before Flame Princess uses her heat sense to find a fake tree leading to an entrance. They enter this dungeon where Finn teaches her things like how to sneak around and intimidate monsters into giving up their loot. After wandering back and forth, looking for keys to various chests, Flame Princess starts to get a little bored. She tells Finn she's not having fun anymore, and Finn realizes he's been telling her what to do the whole time. So they start to do things the Flame Princess way, burning down doors and incinerating every monster they come across. But a chainsaw skeleton comes out and kidnaps Finn, and Flame Princess can't simply destroy it with fire because she might burn Finn instead. So she charges the skeleton and demands that it do the splits, just like Finn taught her. They celebrate a dungeon well explored by planning their next excursion when Flame Princess opens their chest to find a butt monster. Sometimes the best thing to do to alleviate stress is to ignore it. Obviously, you'll eventually address whatever it is that's stressing you out, but in the short term, simply declining to let something bother you can usually solve a lot of problems. For example, Flame Princess was worried she might become evil, so Finn offered to take her to explore a dungeon, not because it would prove anything, but because it would prevent her from worrying about it long enough she can start acting on the information after it's settled. Because the most likely time you might do something stupid when you're stressed is immediately after the stress sets in. So giving yourself an hour or so to calm down helps you make a level-headed decision. Flame Princess forgets about her whole evil streak for long enough that she starts to really get into the whole dungeon diving thing, blasting away enemies and destroying obstacles without a care in the world for whether she's living her life in an evil way. And we've seen in earlier episodes that there's no such thing as a good or bad action, just intentions behind these actions. So sure, Flame Princess is fighting through the dungeon the way an evil person might, but actually making a judgment of a person based on how they kill their free time is ill-informed at best. The Great Birdman. While Princess Bubblegum investigates beached mermaids, Finn and Jake are sent to the Badlands to learn more about the Great Birdman and the surrounding rumors. They collapse from exhaustion and wake up being fed water in a cave by a now-blind Zergiok. Zergiok explains that after he was banished from the Goblin Kingdom, his eyes were stolen by a wizard, and he did some soul-searching, ending up in a valley in the desert where he cares for several birds. Finn and Jake are unsure of his real intentions, though, so they snoop around his cave where they find receipts for a bunch of donations, as well as accidentally injuring one of his birds. Zergiok uses his newly discovered magic to transfer the bird's injury to himself, which convinces Finn and Jake that he's become a changed man. So they tell him that his eyes were actually in his beard all along. He takes to the skies to see the sunset again, but instead of dropping off Finn and Jake at their house, he takes them to the Goblin Kingdom, where he begins to plot to steal Jake's leg and take over the kingdom again. But his birds don't want to fight and they abandon him, with Zergiok once more hitting rock bottom. He removes his eyes and Finn places them where he'll never find them again, and Zergiok walks into the water, where he finds a mermaid girlfriend. When Finn and Jake first met Zergiok, he was a tyrant obsessed with spanking goblin butts who had to be driven out due to his abhorrent behavior. But this time around, he's completely changed who he is because he changed where he is and what he can do. While surrounded by defenseless goblins, he becomes unable to control himself and turns into a bad guy because he's surrounded by people who enable and reward his bad behavior. But get rid of that temptation, and another personality comes out, one where the most rewarding thing he can do is to raise birds, taking care of their defenseless young and curing their wounds. Sometimes a person is just a product of their current environment, and sometimes a person's current environment is a product of who they are. Creating or destroying these feedback loops is merely a matter of putting the right person in the right place at the right time. And of course, the opposite can be true as well. Making a feedback loop of negativity can just be a matter of enabling a person's worst aspects in a way that encourages these habits to return. Zergiok wants to take over the Goblin Kingdom again and starts using even stronger powers to invade, only to fail because his new family, the birds, do not want destruction and chaos of the sort he wanted to make. They abandon him after seeing this part of his nature come out, though Zergiok was eventually able to find happiness again because he once more lost his ability to be a tyrant. Simon and Marcy. Finn and Jake wonder why Marceline invited Ice King to play basketball with them, so she explains why she likes him so much. About 1,000 years before, she and Simon were traveling near the woods when they heard a rustling. Simon put on his crown to protect her, freezing the source of the noise, a deer, but growing more beard and nose in the process. They eat this deer, solving their food problems for a while, but while trying to keep Marcy entertained by reenacting bits from the show Cheers, Simon sees that she has a cough and a fever, seeking out a source of soup from the nearby city's ruins to cure her. They enter the soupery, but find it ransacked, save for a slime monster shambling around that Ice King fights off without using the crown. They then flee to a nearby food truck where Simon hopes to find something for her, but it's full of dead clams and the noise of investigating causes more oozers to swarm their location, with Simon carrying Marcy through a bunch of bubblegum to get to safety. They end up cornered though, and Simon is forced to use the crown to defend her, singing the opening to Cheers to try and remain sane while blasting away the oozers. The bubblegum drops a can of soup and a can opener near Simon, who rushes over to feed Marcy, where he calls her Gunther. Back in the present, Ice King seems to not understand that the story was about him, while Finn and Jake have a greater appreciation for his antics. Marceline and Ice King's relationship has been established by past episodes, but never in such concrete terms as they were here. We know that Simon was still aware of himself. He intended to apologize to Marcy for what was about to happen to him. But we don't know exactly why he was so concerned that he needed to leave a message while the senility was still a ways off. This episode provides extra context for why their relationship is the way it is, and why Marceline is willing to hold on to something that happened almost a millennium ago. Guilt. Marceline was a child and unable to protect herself, so Simon had to do a lot of things for her. This not only included physical protection from the monster that lurked the land, but from the psychological impact seeing all of those things might have had. He even went so far as to try to make games out of curing Marcy's fever, or to carry her so she wouldn't have to feel as though she was being a burden. So the very reason that Simon became crazy was because he had to. It was either that, or let Marcy starve or get eaten or something. So he wrote the songs for her knowing he would be unable to protect her without the crown forever, trying to protect her even after he was gone. But while Simon might be gone, Ice King is not, and the songs that he wrote are still around, as is the most important part of his legacy, Marceline the Vampire Queen. A glitch is a glitch. In this 3D computer-animated episode of Adventure Time, Finn and Jake check an email Ice King has sent them, where they watch a gross video of a woman eating her hair that infects their PC and everything around it with the computer virus. They rush over to the Candy Kingdom to warn Princess Bubblegum, where they find out the Ice King's plan. He wants to delete the entire world except for PB and himself, as she said she would only date him if he were the last person on the planet. This plan doesn't work as PB herself is still on the planet, and she makes out with her own hand instead of the Ice King. Meanwhile, Finn and Jake are trying to stop the glitch by talking to it, when Finn finds a hole that he uses to access the universal source code. Once inside of here, they witness a giant virus that consumes aspects of reality, causing them to cease existing. Jake's arm is erased by the virus, and Finn loses his whole body but his head, so they combine to rush it down, though this doesn't work. Remembering the gross video Ice King sent them, Finn and Jake start to eat Finn's hair, which grosses out the virus enough that it vomits out the source code, returning the world to normal. Finn and Jake reunite with Princess Bubblegum, where her hand makes out with Jake's missing arm, and Ice King is trapped inside of a house that clipped into him as the universe reformed. Once again, Ice King tries to get closer to somebody by wiping out all life except for that person. Technically before he tried to keep Finn trapped in the spirit realm, but same concept. And once again he's foiled by people just not wanting to be around him. This is done immediately following an episode where Ice King's backstory as Simon Petrikov is elaborated upon, and Finn and Jake are ostensibly meant to be more sympathetic towards his history. Adventure Time has always had a bit of tonal whiplash with the way that characters behave and speak, changing depending on who is storyboarding the episode, anywhere from simplistic absurdism to high-effort, high-concept lore dumps. But this is actually a strength of the show in spite of how jarring it can be. This episode's plot is really more of a series of callbacks, as the actual appeal comes from the visual aesthetic of the storyboarding and the 3D animation. Normally, the fact that the plot and character dynamics are ignored in favor of something that looks cool would be a criticism of the show, but the fact that it has hopped around so wildly since the beginning means it's able to develop storylines not purely by building up the characters, but by building them out. The visual style can expand further and further from the crude initial pilot sketches, and this comes across as a logical place to go. The audience can appreciate Adventure Time not for what it does, but for what it's trying to do. Puhoy. Finn is moping around during a knife storm because Flame Princess didn't laugh at one of his jokes, and he's unsure if their relationship will last any longer. Jake tries cheering Finn up by throwing out his favorite mug, but when this doesn't work, Finn decides to go into a pillow fort to fester a bit on his future. While festering, he encounters a series of long tunnels that eventually drop him off near a pillow village, with the door disappearing behind him. He sees villagers running from a blanket dragon, which he slays with his demon sword, earning the praise of the people, including the mayor Quilton. Quilton throws a party for Finn where he meets the mayor's daughter, Rosalind, and the two hit it off together in spite of Finn thinking about his life back home. Back home, Jake has retrieved his favorite mug and is playing a bit with BMO while admitting that his children don't really need a father. In the pillow world, Finn has gotten married to Rosalind and had 2 kids when Quilton shows up with news about the door Finn was seeking before. He takes his family up to a mountain where he speaks to Wallace Shawn, who speaks in riddles that eventually convince Finn not to go back to Jake because he barely remembers his old life. Years later, Finn is on his deathbed, where he passes into the afterlife, bouncing off an entity's tongue and popping out of the pillow fort back in the tree fort. He's about to tell Jake about his crazy dream when he gets a call from Flame Princess, who finally got his joke, forgetting the details of the dream shortly after. Finn begins worrying about his long-term relationship prospects in this episode, and yet when he gets transported to a place where this relationship doesn't exist, he only wants to go home to Flame Princess and Jake, even after having spent many years among his new family. But because Finn has spent so much time thinking about Flame Princess during his later years, he starts missing out on what's in front of him, even taking his family out on a dangerous trek to the mountains instead of spending more quality time with them. As an old man on his deathbed, he even forgets things about his family, and his old life as well. Because he was focusing on one thing, he ignored the other, and this lesson gets carried over back into the real world as Finn realizes that he has to stop thinking about hypothetical futures and focus on the people in the present who care about him. Jake tries to get Finn to stop worrying about things in the past or the future and to focus on the present, the very lesson he ends up learning by the end of the episode, and yet he goes through an opposite story arc as Finn. He throws his favorite mug out the window to prove a point, and then when Finn is not around, he retrieves the mug and keeps it with him for the rest of the episode. Jake wants to imagine himself as too relaxed to care about the tangible things that aren't immediately surrounding him, something that fits his character well. But as he ponders this lesson more and more, he starts to realize he's not actually correct. He has a family and children, and yet they don't really need him, and while this is all in the past, it doesn't mean that the loss doesn't still affect him. BMO Lost. While watching some breakdancing bug, BMO is grabbed by a bird and fed to its babies. After a while, they manage to sneak away from the birds, only to tumble down a mountain far away from home. BMO sulks for a while, waiting for a carnivore to eat them, when a bubble comes by and asks to sulk too. But BMO figures that Finn and Jake would be able to find Bubbles' home, and so the two set out to reach the tree fort on foot. Along the way, they find a baby with a flat hand who BMO names Ricky, and they begin to drag this lost baby with them. The baby crawls off a bridge and BMO jumps after it, rushing over to a waterfall that Bubbles able to stop them from going over by enacting a Rube Goldberg machine of falling objects. BMO passes out while drying their batteries for a night, and the next morning, after the baby puts the batteries back in, they continue on their journey. But Ricky, the baby, starts crying, which attracts something in the bushes, revealed as the baby's mother, calling him Sparkle and carrying him off. BMO spends a while pouting that their baby is gone, but Bubble tries to cheer them up by saying that Sparkle's safe now, and that he found some bugs nearby. BMO recognizes these bugs as the breakdancers from before, and the two set out with new energy, coming to the door of the tree fort where they wait for Jake to come downstairs to let them inside. While waiting, Bubble confesses to BMO that he wants to get married, but when Jake opens the door, he sees the bubble and pops it. At the end of the episode, the bubble realizes that he was not a bubble, but was the air trapped inside of the bubble. Having spent so long inside of there, he forgot there was ever a time when he was outside. BMO seldom goes on adventures with Finn and Jake, typically staying in the tree fort and imagining different goings-on in their head. Because of this, they wind up breaking down emotionally when taken out for an adventure of their own. BMO sees how difficult it will be to make it home and gives up immediately, only vowing to continue when they see Bubble in the same situation, not wanting him to end up the same way. BMO doesn't consider themselves to be a hero, but is more than willing to find another hero to help out, unaware that doing even this much is considered heroic. By the end of the episode, BMO and Bubble have realized that they're far more capable than they believe themselves to be, each one going on a perilous journey, not for themselves, but for another person. But this isn't really that unusual. Most heroic deeds are done out of selflessness because if they were personal goals, they'd just be basic survival, or even a bit narcissistic. Heroism is not when you do great things for the sake of greatness, but for the sake of someone else. BMO and Bubble are able to become heroes by the end of the episode after taking care of a baby together and finding their way to safety. And so when Bubble confesses he's feeling much better at the end of the journey, it's because he learned something about himself. He isn't trapped inside the bubble. He is the bubble. So when he's freed at the end, it was only a physical manifestation of this internal lesson. BMO and Bubble are together forever because they learned from one another. Princess Potluck. Finn and Jake are going to the Princess Potluck, though Finn is missing his sock and has a nasty callus forming while claiming that Jake's makeup makes him look like a target. They arrive, where PB informs them of a raffle being held at the end of the evening for the contents of an ice chest before placing Finn's food, a single warm can of soda, into the ice nearby. Ice King feels someone disturbing his ice and investigates, seeing everyone else at the party and complaining he didn't get an invite. So Ice King tries several schemes to ruin this party, like placing lemons on cats and feeding lasagna to rabbits. These predictably fail, so he sends Gunter in a princess disguise to ruin the party, though the other princesses are happy to see the penguin and encourage him to dance. Ice King, furious he was betrayed again, calls the banana guards on the party, citing noise ordinances, though the banana guards end up invited to the party too. So Ice King resorts to using his magic to ruin the party, raining hail on everyone and forcing Finn to fight him, something he does by taking off his shoe and placing it over the Ice King's nose. Ice King surrenders and claims he was only crashing the party because he wasn't invited, only to learn he was. Finn makes a sock out of some tortillas, and PB announces the results of the raffle, that Finn has won a sea lard. Before they can leave, Jake is hit in the head with an arrow fired by the red squirrel who hates him. A companion episode to BMO Noir explaining what Finn and Jake got up to while BMO was investigating Finn's missing sock, although it's more accurate to say that this is an episode about Ice King that Finn and Jake happen to be in, as most of the inciting incidents are done by him, the rest of the plot just explaining a few random tidbits of information gleaned from the 20 seconds Finn and Jake were in the other episode. Like how Finn had a sock at the end of the episode, and instead of having it be remembered as an animation error, he is instead shown making one out of some of Ice King's snack foods. Or the arrow sticking out of Jake's head not being caused by the fact that he has a target on his face, but because the squirrel from the Duke is trying to get him still. And of course, Finn is carrying some blob object over his head, introduced as their sea lard, and then added to the collection. Adventure Time has had sequel episodes before, like King Worm to Evicted, but those often have heavier implications for the plot, as the creators want to revisit something from a more lighthearted season with a new, not-so-lighthearted tone. But this time it's more about answering questions nobody asked, but the audience wished that they had. In an 11-minute episode, there's not enough time to show everything going on, so why not turn an unseen B-plot into a seen A-plot? James Baxter, the horse. BMO drops an egg they were pretending was a baby and begins to cry over their dead child. Finn and Jake see BMO crying and try to cheer them up, but these attempts fail. Then a horse named James Baxter comes by, shouting his own name while riding on a beach ball, and BMO's happy again. Inspired by this, Finn and Jake go around trying to cheer other people up by shouting their name in a horse voice, though the funeral they attend, as well as everyone else who sees this shouting, is only horrified. So they decide not to simply imitate James Baxter, but to refine their formula, coming up with the most cheerful noise to make with the help of BMO. They eventually get a decent sound, but they refine it further at the Institute of So-Und, where they use more advanced equipment to isolate the perfect sound, as well as concluding they need a visual element too. Soon they have the perfect cheer-up routine, and they begin to bring joy to the people they previously freaked out. But when they cheer up mourners at a funeral, the casket starts to shake, and a ghost comes out to attack them. Finn and Jake are punched into a hole, and the ghost is about to finish them off when James Baxter returns to dance on his ball some more, cheering up the ghost enough that he stops fighting before the horse rides off into the sunset. James Baxter's were voiced by James Baxter, and his other James Baxterisms were animated by James Baxter. James Baxter is best recognized for his work on Who Framed Roger Rabbit or The Lion King, basically as a guy who can make animals move realistically, something considered difficult to do in animation due to the number of limbs involved and the tendency for animation professors to prioritize learning about humans. His involvement in this episode was inspired by a guest lecture he gave at CalArts while Pendleton Ward was a student there, in which it was requested that he draw a horse balancing on a beach ball. A task that was difficult in the sense that balancing on a beach ball requires a lot of keyframe movement, making it difficult in the first place. Horses are difficult to draw in motion, and finally, the movements involved in making the horse dance on the beach ball require different joints and so on to move in ways unfamiliar to most artists. The plot of this episode is a bit esoteric, but can be explained as Finn and Jake working tirelessly to find the exact right combination of sights and sounds needed to make people happy, which has to be a metaphor for the process of animation itself. Their first attempts to be entertaining are things they think would be nice to do, but they're wrong about this. It takes a serious look at the minutiae of comedy to really nail what audiences want, in a way that points out how seriously one has to take being silly if they're to be successful. But in a less esoteric interpretation, this is an episode about a talking horse on a ball, which makes the audience smile, regardless of how much effort and expertise it took to create such a thing. Shh! Finn and Jake have a bet to see who can go the longest without talking, communicating only with a limited number of signs. BMO tries to tell them that they invited over a group of bikini babes to dance to their favorite song, but as Finn and Jake don't have any signs to acknowledge this, BMO starts to worry about the silent guys in the tree fort, deducing they've been replaced by shapeshifters and hiding inside the fort's walls. Jake shrinks down to go after BMO, encountering the various things living inside the walls before meeting up with BMO only to get chased out. The bikini babes show up to the tree fort, hearing music but not being able to get inside, so they fly onto the roof to dance anyway. Finn and Jake try more elaborate ways to lure BMO out, but soon give up and start just smashing the walls down with axes. This causes the roof to cave in, with the bikini babes raining down from above before BMO rushes in to warn them about shapeshifters. Finn and Jake try to wordlessly defend themselves against the attacking babes, but are soon overpowered, with Jake crying out in pain. With the bet off, Finn begins to explain what was going on to BMO, who doesn't care. They start partying, and the party god crashes through the remains of their roof. Adventure Time's visual storytelling has always been influenced heavily by the writing style it uses, that again being one of having no writers and getting storyboarding teams to write each episode. Because of this, the written and visual elements are closely tied together, meaning that an episode where the two main characters never communicate verbally works well because the motion is decided upon at the same time as the dialogue. Ironically, the characters communicating with signs makes them far less expressive than usual because they have to hold still to make the sign readable to the audience. So the typical expressiveness of their bodies is subdued to make the episode's plot easier to follow, and this is why it makes sense for BMO to assume they've been possessed. While Adventure Time's art style is very simple when not moving, the real identity of the show comes from how the characters move from shot to shot, and how they look episode to episode. Because storyboard artists are writers, writers are also storyboard artists. And the thing about writers is that they're not always great at drawing stuff on model. For a show like Adventure Time, this isn't much of a problem, as showing Jake as being completely off model fits with the fact that he's a shapeshifter, and the more off-kilter interpretations of the characters usually fits the gags the writer's going for. Ironically, BMO is afraid of shapeshifters because Finn and Jake aren't shapeshifting enough. The Suitor. Peppermint Butler is interrupted while trying to summon Ogduad by a gumball guardian who says Princess Bubblegum is overworked and needs to date one of her many suitors. So Pep Butt looks through these suitors to find Brocco, who inherited his spot in line from his father, and he is selected to woo the princess. PB takes him on a short date in the interest of research, but unsatisfied with this, Brocco looks through his ancestors' possessions for a copy of J.T. Dogzone's book on seduction, but none of the advice there works either. Later, he overhears Finn and Jake being given a quest to find a soul stone from the Vapor Swamps, and he asks them to let him do the quest instead to impress PB. He returns from this quest horribly burned, only to find out Princess Bubblegum no longer needs the stone because she made an artificial one. A gumball guardian then grabs Brocco and brings him back to Peppermint Butler, saying that his promise to assist in wooing the princess has failed. So Pep Butt makes a deal with Ogduad to free him in exchange for turning Bracco into a love magnet. This transformation turns him into a three-legged monster who rushes back to Princess Bubblegum's lab, only to find a second PB named Peabot, who was built to date Bracco, as PB can't possibly show more love to one citizen of the Candy Kingdom than anyone else. Bracco and Peabot run away together as Peppermint Butler slaps the princess because he wanted to date the love magnet instead. Once again, we get an appearance from JT Dogzone, and once again we get a character struggling and ultimately failing to woo another one. The reasons for this are pretty obvious from the beginning. Princess Bubblegum is far too busy with science stuff to make time for a relationship with anyone else. It's not that she has zero interest, just higher priorities. The fact that so many try to flamingo around her, or spend hundreds of years waiting instead of figuring out what, if anything, she wants out of a relationship, is why so many have failed. The issue is that these suitors will create imaginary versions of Princess Bubblegum in their heads instead of getting to know the real person, and then act disappointed that their attempts to woo this imaginary version of her have failed. Princess Bubblegum says as much during the episode, only agreeing to go out with Bracco because of an academic curiosity and why men like him pursued something they invented in their heads instead of seeking more genuine connection. And while she manages to get results, Bracco himself only becomes disfigured and jacked up as he is chasing something impossible to obtain due to the fact that he's chasing someone who doesn't exist, until PB creates a version of her that conforms to his ideals. The party is over, Isla de Senorita. Ice King is trying to kidnap Princess Bubblegum again, but is caught in the act with PB calling the banana guards to throw him out. Ice King is upset because he views this as PB being emotionally immature and refusing to acknowledge their relationship, so he makes an ice boat and sails off. But a storm crashes this boat and he washes up on an island where he hears singing in the distance. Investigating this singing reveals that the island itself is a giant woman, and she begins talking to Ice King about their respective relationships, revealing she's dating the party god, though he spends more time partying with others than with her. Ice King builds a house on her stomach and the two become closer and closer, with Ice King eventually convincing Isla de Senorita to break up with Party God, though she second-guesses herself and can't actually go through with it. So Ice King follows the Party God to tell him off in person, the two fighting it out for a while before Ice King crushes his head with a frozen cloud, Party God plummeting into the ocean below. Ice King retrieves the body and puppeteers it back to the island, where he pretends to talk to her about their relationship, finally giving her the courage to break up formally. Ice King flings the wolf head into space and returns to Oo, where he barges into PB's lab to break up with her for all the things Party God has done. Ice King and the island gossip about their respective relationships, though as with all gossips, the conversations are steered towards giving only one side of the relationship struggles. This is most obviously shown in the fact that Ice King is talking about Princess Bubblegum as though they had been dating for a long time, something that Island Lady takes at face value without really questioning it. She's being truthful about the way the Party God is treating her, so what would Ice King have to gain by lying? The answer is, of course, that his opinions will be validated by a person who only has the parts of the story that he thinks are worth telling, because they make him look good. No mention is made of the fact that the interaction he had with Princess Bubblegum prior to leaving for the ocean started off with him trying to duct tape her mouth shut. So any opinion formed after hearing half of a story is, at best, a half-baked opinion. Any opinion formed after hearing one person express it is a half-baked opinion so long as it's something that another person could form an idea of themselves. Sometimes you only hear half a story and that half is the right one, such as Island Lady talking about Party God and the audience learning that everything she said about him was completely true. Sometimes it's Ice King telling his version of events that we know is false from the start, but unlike Island Lady, we're able to confidently call this idea out because we know better. One last job. Jake gets a tape in the mail depicting his daughter Jake Jr. having been kidnapped, with a voiceover telling him that he must reassemble his old criminal gang to steal the Baker's Shard from the Royal Candy Vault. So Jake reaches out to Garrett, able to seduce any woman with his eyes, the Flying Lettuce Brothers, able to mimic voices, and Tiffany, to perform one last job. They get together to plot their heist, entering the vault disguised as a milk delivery, and taking out the captain of the guard before taking over, and having the Flying Lettuce Brothers mimic his voice to order all the guards away from their position. The guards go into the courtyard where they are told to shout, shouting loud enough to cover the sound of Tiffany blowing off the door to the vault. Jake shapeshifts inside and navigates himself through the traps, finally grabbing the baker's shard. He's told to pass it out of the vault and to the voice that took his daughter, only to reveal that this was one of the Flying Lettuce brothers, having mimicked the voices, and his old gang has betrayed him. Jake chases after the milk truck, catching up to it, where he finds Jake Jr. herself in the vehicle, saying that she was the one who orchestrated the entire thing. Jake takes her away from the rest, sitting her down to talk about why she did this, as she had heard about Jake's criminal past and wanted to be more like him. Jake tells her he's proud of her, but also not to do it again, only to be even more proud when she starts planning another long con. A few seasons back, when Jake first began to hint at his criminal history, that was just a gag based on his voice actor also playing Bender from Futurama, as well as a little bit of on-the-spot explanation for why Finn and Tree Trunks knew where to go next. When Tiffany was first introduced, he was a gag character designed to make the audience think that Jake was trying to find a girl to make Lady jealous, only to be revealed as a human boy. This was also at a point where the idea of Finn being the only human on Ooo wasn't really solidified. Garrett and the Flying Lettuce brothers were also just names from a list of silly-sounding names that existed as a one-off gag. Jake's original character sheet was not written with an elaborate criminal history considered, and yet because these aspects of his character were written and built upon one another, it feels completely natural that Jake would have an old gang, because he's mentioned an old gang before. That the characters in this old gang were actually names that had been listed before too was more happenstance than planning. This is one of the difficulties in writing a retrospective about Adventure Time. When reviewing an episode that gets referenced later, there's a temptation to spoil the future importance of these characters and events as soon as they are mentioned. Except the episodes themselves were not written with these developments in mind, so for the purposes of retrospective, it's better to write about the episode in the context of someone watching through these episodes as they air. This allows the later twists to be more impactful when they happen, and since this is how the show was written, it works best to think about it in these terms as well. Another 5 more short Graybles. Cuber works on a birdhouse, struggling to remember where the place where the door hole goes, so he plays more Graybles because the answer will be in one of them. The first Grayble sees Jake Jr. worrying about the future, so Jake and Finn offer to build her a time machine out of couch cushions. But Jake Jr. claims she's too old to play pretend because she's like 30. Also like 30 is Cinnamon Bun, who is told by Princess Bubblegum that he can't have a nightlight anymore. After struggling with finding soft light for his room, he burns his house down and runs away screaming the same name as the brand of canned something that Ice King throws out from his fridge. Once his chores are done, he sits down to watch a movie with the Gunters, who want to watch a kids musical, while Ice King wants to watch a police procedural. He bargains with them to accept his movie choice in exchange for doing them a favor, dancing like a ballerina while the movie plays. Cinnamon Bun has run to the Earl of Lemongrab, where the Earls of Lemongrab throw things at him before returning to their business of playing with their son, Lemon Sweets. They fight over whether Lemon Sweets wants to dance or go to sleep, and after Lemongrab tries to get a sleeping hat for his son, he turns around to see Lemongrab making their son dance while saying, "We hate you." Lemongrab fights Lemongrab and they drop their son, who shatters. Lemongrab then grabs Lemongrab and starts to swallow him as he screams about the end. Mr. Fox is admiring his end table, as well as the rest of his furniture, like his radiator almost shooting his both eyes, his bugs selling each other houses, and his bed that contains a depression that he sees himself sleeping in. His sleeping self starts to draw a map that will lead the two to treasure when Cinnamon Bun breaks in, waking him up and breaking all the lights before leaving through a new hole in the wall. Finn and Jake jerk their time machine to turn it on, and the whole tree fort begins to flash several bright colors with alarms blaring. Cuber pauses the Graybles, pointing to a birdhouse on the wall and saying that he has solved his mystery, though he agrees to play it through to the end so the audience can see how the story finishes. Jake Jr. turns off BMO's alarm and chides Cinnamon Bun for breaking in to steal Jake's stuff. She then gives him a Jake-shaped nightlight, and Cinnamon Bun runs away. BMO apologizes for interrupting their time travel with the alarm, though before she can say she's too old for make-believe, Jake holds up tomorrow's newspaper, which he did not make himself. Candy Streets. While Finn and Jake are playing with cats, Lumpy Space Princess bursts into Princess Bubblegum's lab, crying about something being stolen from her. Princess Bubblegum sedates her, though too effectively, and LSP is only able to mumble about Pete something. Finn and Jake leave to investigate the crime, heading to a hotel room based on a key she was holding. They find this room a mess, and begin to search for clues, finding a bloodstain they have BMO begin to analyze. But Finn suspects the culprit who left the blood behind may have gone to a local pharmacy for a band-aid, and from there, they're directed to a train station, where they pursue the suspect further, chasing him down in a Jake car before they catch the man, Pete Sassafras, and throw him in jail. As they're wondering whether to become full-time detectives, BMO returns with the blood sample, saying it was actually pizza sauce and that LSP was saying pizza before. They go to Pizza Sassy's, where Finn and Jake search for the delivery boy who might have robbed LSP before, returning to the scene of the crime, where they find Lumpy Space Princess refusing to let him leave. As it turns out, the precious thing was her heart, and she was just being obsessive again. Finn and Jake are playing detective in this episode. Well, Jake's doing it more compulsively, and as detectives, they need crimes to solve and criminals to arrest. Because they need a criminal to hunt down, they start looking for a criminal, never stopping to consider whether perhaps there was no criminal in the case they were investigating. The harder you search for something, the more likely it is you end up finding it, even if the thing you were looking for was never there in the first place. A healthy dose of skepticism would have led the duo to ask themselves who it was they were getting their information from, Lumpy Space Princess, and how reliable of a source she was, not at all. When trying to play detective, the most important thing to search for is the truth, not to come up with a theory and then try to find facts or to make proof to confirm that theory. So Finn and Jake threw an innocent man in jail because they jumped to a conclusion and kept going instead of using common sense to determine if a crime had even happened in the first place. You always have to second-guess yourself, not because you lack faith in your own decision-making abilities, but because you always benefit from being more sure of things, especially ideas you build off of later. It's alright to double-check things and probably even find it triple-check the important things, because you can ask a question like, am I doing the right thing, and then answer it with yes, and that will make whatever it is you're doing even more righteous for having second-guessed yourself than had you not. Wizards only, fools. Starchy is sick and refuses medical treatment as he only wants magical cures rather than scientific ones. So Princess Bubblegum recruits the help of Finn and Jake to infiltrate Wizard City by disguising themselves as wizards and using a recording of PB torturing Ice King for the password to get inside. Once there, Finn and Jake marvel at some of the magic around them, though PB insists it's just applied science. They watch a non-wizard get destroyed outside of Ron James's Spell Palace, a store they enter to buy a cold spell. But when Princess Bubblegum refuses to buy the potion unless he explains how it works, the shopkeep calls them fakes and alerts the guards, so they simply grab the potion and run away. They run into Abracadaniel and convince him to hide them in an underground room where some wizards from before are planning to sacrifice him. But when the wizard police burst into this secret society for harboring a criminal, Princess Bubblegum reveals herself, demanding an audience with the Grand Master Wizard. He agrees to let them go if Princess Bubblegum says wizards rule, but she refuses and they're all thrown in jail. While in prison, Abracadaniel starts harassing PB and challenges her to an honorable wizard stabbing to death. PB wins, though when she refuses to take his life, the other wizards threaten the entire group. Then Finn realizes the cold spell Jake has been carrying all along is actually a cold spell, not a cold spell. They freeze the courtyard and escape, having Abracadaniel distract Starchy with magic before PB just injects him with the antidote from the beginning of the episode. Any sufficiently advanced science is indistinguishable from magic, a rule of fantasy world building that allows the same TTRPG systems that determine roles in sci-fi settings to apply to fantasy as well. But to Princess Bubblegum, all magic is science, just performed by people who don't know what they're doing. It's probably worth considering that the world of Ooh operates on different rules than the world we live in, so what appears to be magic to us is something understandable that can be measured. Because that's really all that science is, a series of systems used to measure the natural world. If we called electricity magic and called batteries magic wands, and engineers were wizards, which most engineers I know would be really into, then an alien observing us would still be able to follow the rules and mechanics of our electrical magic system. So magic in Adventure Time is science because magic exists and has measurable functions. If you can measure something, then you can understand something, and if you can understand something, it stops being magical and starts being consistent. That underlies the real conflict in this episode, where Princess Bubblegum doesn't so much take exception to the fact that magic and wizards exist, but the fact that people use the phrase magic as an excuse not to understand what's going on. Rather than having a curiosity about how a potion works, they call it magic and turn off their imagination, rather than showing wonder at what's really going on. The real difference between magic and science isn't metrics, but curiosity.